I think it's time to worry about the White Sox wanting to trade Luis Robert Jr. because it seems like it's for all the wrong reasons, and a recent report only furthers that notion. Let's discuss next on Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert of SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network. And also, I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And also follow or subscribe to the show at wherever you get your podcasts. Well, the Athletic's Ken Rosenthal recently mentioned how weak Luis Robert Jr.'s trade market is, and that should further cement the team would be better off keeping him. But still, I fear two reasons are motivating the Sox to view his value incorrectly that I want to discuss in the first segment. Then let's discuss a projected starting rotation for 2025. And finally, let's circle back to Rosenthal as he had a blurb on Michael Soroka's free agent market that has me feeling like he might be another Ronaldo Lopez bad look for the franchise. And you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So you heard me on Monday discuss why it's best to keep Luis Robert Jr. His trade market right now is basically pennies on the dollar. And you shouldn't be getting pennies on the dollar for such a talented baseball player, even though he's usually always hurt. And last year, in 2024, he was just abysmal when he was healthy. But I do think the losing just dragged on him. Although he's definitely not what I would consider a foundational player. Great talent, but he's more of a supporting cast player with his glove. And again, he's just going to hit, his glove. He could hit 38 home runs, but he could also hit just 12 or 14 like he did this season. And, his average, his highest career average was 284, but when he was healthy enough, it was 263. Now, obviously, those are more of the traditional stats. When you look at his OPS and his F4, obviously, he could be a superstar player. But just with all the numbers and the injuries and all that, he should be viewed as a high-end supporting player. Obviously, someone, though, that you should still get something significant for, which I'll discuss is why Ken Rosenthal pointed out that that's kind of what the Sox are asking for. And it's still, they're asking just for something significant where they're not asking for, they should be getting quality and quality quantity, but they're just wanting a quality piece. And that's got me worried. And I'll get into why I'm worried in a second. But the Athletic, Ken Rosenthal had a blurb pointing out the conflict between how the Sox view Luis Robert Jr. and how the rest of the league views him. And I got to say, I'm with the rest of the league here. That's why I'm nervous. The White Sox are about to trade an asset for all the wrong reasons, because either he's if you think he's still a foundational superstar asset or just a very high-end supporting cast asset, it's still an asset. This isn't right now replacement level Andrew Vaughn where you're going to get cash or player to be named later. And the two reasons are simple. The first is what I covered on Monday. There's a chance if Luis Robert Jr. has another season where he misses the bulk of it with an injury, you're paying him $2 million to go away in his buyout more than exercising his $20 million option. For $15 million, it's guaranteed. Why not roll the dice? That's fine. But you just saw the Sox pay Yohan Moncada, I believe it was $22 million to only play, I believe, 15 games. And then they, that easy choice. We're going to pay you $5 million to go away rather than $25 million. In this case, it's going to be $2 million to go away rather than 20. The second reason I fear they're motivated to trade him this offseason is he's making $15 million. It feels like, and I'll get to it in a little bit, it feels like the White Sox are trying to get rid of any player basically making over $2 million. But first, let's get to what Rosenthal wrote. And again, I'll circle back to the salary dump. Here's what Rosenthal wrote in The Athletic. A rival executive who has spoken recently with the Chicago White Sox said the team is rightly asking high in trade discussions involving left-hander Garrett Crochet. The executive, who was granted anonymity for his candor, was less charitable in his description of the White Sox ask for center fielder Luis Robert Jr. Quote, "I don't think they understand what his value is," end quote, the executive said. The White Sox naturally bristle at the notion that they're overreaching, according to a source briefed on their thinking. Their position is that suitors for Robert essentially want something for nothing. They aren't asking for multiple prospects, the source said, but want, quote, a meaningful piece, end quote, in return. The way the White Sox see it, there is no point in trading Robert for, say, a team's 15th best prospect. At that price, the team might be better off carrying Robert into the season and taking the chance he would rebuild his value. Yes! Okay, so now that's my commentary. Yes, you're going to, if that's basically, if I'm reading this right, kind of the wording, if, say, the 15th best prospect right now is being offered, that's not enough for Luis Robert Jr. That's not even close to a meaningful piece. So, yeah, the better play is keep Luis Robert Jr. Yeah, you're going to have to cross your fingers that he stays healthy, but if he stays healthy and returns to 2023 level, guess what? You will get that meaningful piece. You might get 2 or 3 meaningful pieces at the trade deadline. But, thinking that, hey, we can get something meaningful right now. I don't like the intentions because I have a feeling I know what the intentions are. And, when it comes to this team, thinking that, the teams are just asking, for nothing for something, the arrogance, again, on 35th and Shields, you would hope that'd get purged by now. You just lost 121 games. Stop acting like your players are the most valuable guys on the market. You only have one valuable trade asset, one, and that's Garrett Crochet. The numbers support it. Otherwise, you have still potential for a 27-year-old Luis Robert Jr. Stop thinking he is 2023 Luis Robert Jr. Even then, they were saying, around the league, the one thing was okay, he finally had a season, but he was hurt the 2 previous seasons. We got to see it again. And guess what? You didn't see it. 29 teams are not trying to fleece the Chicago White Sox. Well, they are, but, in terms of, because everybody wants to try to get something for as minimal as possible, but they're not also trying to be coming back and saying, well, here's the broken down chair. They're saying, I'll give you maybe my 15th best prospect. In that case, these 29 teams are telling you basically the greatest ability is availability, and Crochet is never available. 708 regular season games has been played since Luis Robert Jr. debuted in 2020. You want to know how many he's played in them? 467. Okay? He's missed a third of all the possible games he could play, including him playing in just 68 games in 2021 and 98 in 2022 and 100 in 2024. So that gets me to, again, what are some of the motivations of why the White Sox want to trade him? The fear is he's likely going to get hurt again in 2025 to the point that you're going to have to pay him $2 million just to go away. And then his asset status becomes non-existent. But his status right now is not giving me something significant. And why are you settling when the gamble is just be available and produce? That's the gamble. That's all it is. Just be there and produce. Even if it's 250 and a 750 OPS and let's say 15 home runs, hopefully, by the trade deadline. That's obviously going to get you something. And those numbers aren't above replacement level like Andrew Vaughn. It's not like you're trying to sell a solid second half, but being dragged down by this large salary like Andrew Benintendi. This is show up and produce. Show up and produce. That's what it is. Because I bet by the 2025 deadline, you're not only going to get something significant if he shows up and produce, but you'll get the amount of quantity for something significant too. I also think economics is at play. However, this is what Rosenthal wrote. Robert is guaranteed $15 million next season, and his contract includes $20 million club options for both 2025 and 26. The White Sox, whose estimated cash payroll next season is $75 million, don't need to purge his salary, but the shortage of center fielders and quality bats in the free agent market should continue to drive interest in Robert, and at some point this offseason lead to better offers. Yeah, well, I'm still hoping I'm going to be 7 feet tall. Just some things might not happen. And you're right, a team might get desperate. There might be some injuries. You might actually have to wait a little bit. But I get the feeling the Sox do want to purge his salary. And this is not insider information. This is more of my jump to conclusions, Matt, especially when I got MLB.com Scott Merkin's inbox. He sends out a newsletter every week highlighting some of the things he wrote. And he recently wrote there are 4 players the Sox would love to trade at the winter meetings. And guess who is on the list? Robert Jr., Benintendi, and Vaughn, along with Crochet. And guess who are projected to be the 3 highest paid players this season? You're right. You're right. Sorry, jump to conclusions, man. But it's Robert Jr., Benintendi, and Vaughn. So don't underestimate Jerry Reinsdorf to look at the mess of the CHSN launch and the likely decline of his cable grift economics and immediately start to panic. Don't underestimate that. Attendance is down. I mean, the team is so desperate to keep season ticket holders from declining that they're offering some very nice discounts on things like concessions and even prices for season tickets. They're desperate. They do not want to lose any more money. And while all baseball teams should not be able to claim poverty, no one does it better than Jerry. So don't think for a second the Sox are lowering their demand to just something significant, just to shed LRJ's $15 million salary. Do not put it past Jerry Reinsdorf to do that. And when you're motivated by fear, because that's one thing that I think they're motivated by, again, just on my jump to conclusions, Matt, that they're motivated by fear that if Robert Jr. gets hurt again, and for a significant amount of time, they're going to lose him for nothing, and economics, you tend to make a bad deal. Well, let's switch it up. Let's switch to the rotation and look at the projected one for 2025, where Garrett Crochet is not a part of it. I'll discuss if it makes sense next. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And I always maintain FanDuel's spreads, over, under, and money lines are fun to play. But if you want to win big or at least double your money, FanDuel's parlays, props, and futures is the way to go. So, for example, you could turn $10 into $100 if San Francisco is ahead at the half, but Chicago wins at the end of the game, as that is at plus 1,000. Say you play with your heart and don't ever want to root against your beloved Chicago. How about at plus 270 parlay of the Bears at plus 3.5, and the under of 44.5 points being met? $10 on that nearly triples your money. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms. So make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. And hey, leave a 5-star review. I know on Apple we're at 4.5. Hey, let's get that rating up. Like I said, some of the ratings I looked at it, I'm like, okay, that's when I first started. Got to get my legs back. Was out of the podcast game for a little bit. Now I'm back. I feel like I'm hitting my stride. I feel confident. Hopefully you feel the same. And hey, leave me a 5-star review. I'd greatly appreciate it then. But either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. All right. So I know sometimes Bleacher Report is more content creation and less hard-hitting analysis. But Joel Reuter's recent starting rotation projections got me thinking. I would not be completely opposed to the 2 suggested free agents that he brings in to replace Garrett Crochet. Only because if these 2 that he suggests don't work out as starters, you still have bullpen value with these guys. However, I prefer one or the other to be in the starting rotation, not 2 veteran starters. I don't want 2 veteran starters. I'm sorry. I can accept one to eat some innings, show the younger pitchers the ropes, eventually be flipped at the deadline. I can understand that. I like that. But what I don't want is a repeat of Chris Flexen, Mike Clevenger, and Brad Keller taking away precious developmental starts at the big leagues. I don't want that anymore. Again, the expectations for this season are very low. I mean, I think even 55 wins would be greeted with a little bit of joy. Even 50, maybe, if we really lower the standards. I mean, basically it's don't flirt with 39 wins. That's the standard to me. And that's a very, very low floor. So why not use that when you have a depth of young pitching talent? Give them some runway. Unless it's announced by Brian Bannister, Sox pitching director, that some of the young arms are better served breaking into the big leagues in the bullpen, then okay. Then, yeah, you got to fill some spots. And I know he has suggested that in the past, but I want it stated again. I guess I want to be a literal in this context. Then I'm fine because I do trust the team's pitching director. But here's what Reuter suggests as the potential starting rotation. He has Joe Ross, Jakob Junis being signed, and then Jonathan Cannon, Davis Martin, Drew Thorpe. Ross pitched in 25 innings for the Brewers last season with 10 starts. Missed 2 months with a back strain. He had a 3.77 ERA and a 3.83 FIP with a 1.37 WHIP in 74 innings. I also talked about Junis's number. I believe it was on Friday. So every day has probably heard that. But if you want, go back and listen to, I believe it was Friday's show. I think it was the second or third segment. And when it comes to Junis and Ross, I like their versatility. And I also like how both benefited from the Brewers pitching lab. He was out of baseball in 2022 and 2023 after having Tommy John surgery. So, that's another thing. Comes back, pitches very well. Although here's the catch with Ross. His ERA was 4.98 on July 30th when he returned from that back injury and he made his final start. He moved to the bullpen, gave up just 5 earned runs the rest of the season. So that's why I would love the Sox to sign Ross and Junis. But maybe you might want to go with Junis because at least he had like towards the end a nice stretch of 5 starts. But I prefer if they do bring in Ross, bring him in as a reliever, try to flip him at the deadline. Because again, I'm not against Ross or Junis being signed. I'm against seeing if both can eat innings to build up trade value as a starter because it means then Sean Burke, Kai Bush, Mason Adams, Jairo Iriarte, or Nick Nastrini, their development gets pushed back. Because, again, we're going to chase something that might not be there. So that's what happened. It was got to see if Michael Soroka, who I'll talk about in the second segment, let's see if he can reclaim his value. Didn't happen. Let's see if Chris Flexen can cover some innings for us. He did, but you always had to pray when he put guys on base, because that's what he did best, that the damage would be minimized. And there was no trade market for him. We wasted time. Even if it was 6 starts, it was still 6 starts that could have went to Nick Nastrini, or Jonathan Cannon could have figured out how to pitch to lefties actually at the big leagues. Because again, the expectations should have been nilled by that point, but we had to give Mike Clevenger and Brad Keller starts. I don't want that. One in the rotation, other than the bullpen, cool with that. Not both. Because Sean Burke showed enough in his cup of coffee that he should be given runway to start the season in the rotation. Also, this proposal is 5 righties. I would suggest, if the front office does not think Kai Bush or Jake Eder are ready for a starting job right away, you may want to then maybe go with Jared Schuster. He did, at least he was an opener for most of the, when he did to sort of start, he was an opener. He has been a starter in the past. At least you throw a southpaw in the rotation. He's still young and under club control. I think he's more probably a long reliever. That's probably his destiny. But, at this point, if you're going to trade Garrett Crochet and you need to cover innings, it can't hurt to have a lefty. Now, it's not law that you have to have a lefty in your starting rotation. I just would prefer at least having one left-hander. Well, let's circle back to Ken Rosenthal, who also had a blurb on Michael Soroka. That first got me thinking, hey, maybe not. Why not bring him back? But then it got me thinking, he's about to go someplace else and thrive. Let's discuss next on Locked On White Sox. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, wherever they get their podcasts, as the show is available on all major podcast platforms, such as Spotify. Seeing the tweets recently about people sharing how much they listen to their podcast. First of all, I appreciate all those that, if I'm in your top 5 for Locked On White Sox, love it. If I'm not in your top 5, at least make sure, some of those White Sox podcasts out there, like White Sox Talk, or From the 108 or Good Guys Talk Back or Sox Machine or the CHGO podcast. I could, Sox in the Basement. I could keep listing them on and on, because if there's one thing that, Sox fans have covered, it's plenty of great podcasts for the White Sox. One thing they don't get a ton of coverage from is The Athletic, but when it comes to national stuff, they still get covered. And The Athletic's Ken Rosenthal had some interesting context recently about pitcher Michael Soroka's free agent market. It was in the same write-up that I talked about in the first segment with Luis Robert Jr. And if you don't remember Michael Soroka, it was because he was hurt for most of the season. You might also be trying to forget him, as he was one of the players the Sox were hoping would recapture a career season he previously had, only to be what he currently is, and that's bad and injured. Soroka is now a free agent, and even after missing all of 2021 and 2022 with injuries for the Braves, barely pitching in 2023, and, well, pretty much the same for 2024, he's got a free agent market. What Rosenthal wrote up first got me thinking, well, hey, why not re-sign him? And it got me thinking, well, because there's a good chance he's just going to get hurt again. And then it got me thinking, this could be Ronaldo Lopez all over again. Goes to a team that's actually viewing him in a way that I'm about to share and unlocking, and he stays, well, Lopez never really had a lot of injury issues, but in the case of Soroka, stays healthy, and guess what? Becomes an all-star. And then the narrative again keeps going where, see, guys thrive once they leave the South Side. So here's what Rosenthal wrote up. Most teams have met with free agent pitcher Michael Soroka, prefer him as a back-end starter with frontline potential, not as a reliever, despite his better numbers from the bullpen last season, league sources said. Soroka, 27, stands out as an interesting upside player for teams looking for the value in the market. In 2019 with the Atlanta Braves, he finished runner-up for the National League Rookie of the Year award and 6th in the Cy Young Award. Injuries, including twice tearing his right Achilles tendon, limited Soroka to 46 innings from 2020 to 2023. Last season with the White Sox, Soroka had a 4.74 ERA in 79 2/3 innings, splitting time between the bullpen and the rotation. The splits were stark. In nine outings as a starter, Soroka had a 6.39 ERA with 24 strikeouts and 24 walks in 43 2/3 innings. In 16 appearances as a reliever, Soroka had a 2.75 ERA with 60 strikeouts and 20 walks in 36 innings. The better numbers, especially the drastic increase in strikeout rate, can be attributed to a usage change. After his demotion to the bullpen, Soroka leaned more heavily on his four-seam fastball. In September, he threw the pitch 55.4% of the time, 31 times apiece to right-handers and left-handed batters, holding batters to just a 143 batting average. Soroka is not the same pitcher he was in 2019 when he was known for a top-rated sinker. His mechanics have changed. Therefore, Soroka actually wanted to throw more of his four-seam fastball all season in 2024. He got the chance to do so in the bullpen, and other clubs noticed the results. Okay. And then Rosenthal goes on to say a team like the Mets could be a landing spot for, and any team trying to sign him to be a bullpen pitcher. Any team interested, there are some teams interested in signing him to be a bullpen pitcher, but those are contenders without a spot in the rotation. So a lot of people, a lot of teams are viewing him as a starter. So first it got me thinking, if there's a market for him and you're trading Crochet, why not just sign Soroka to see if his improved fastball can eat up some innings, and then try to move him at the deadline for something. And also if being a starter doesn't work out, move him back to the bullpen and hope he can be valuable at the bullpen. Then I thought, no. He's going to be most likely hurt. I'm just going to give you a warning as someone who watched and hoped, just kind of like the White Sox hoped, he's going to get hurt. He's got, that his body, I don't think is, some people's bodies are just not made for the rigors of a 162-game season. And at least with, say, Luis Robert Jr., you have a recent history of him being available to still sell. Soroka, you have to go back to 2019 for the last time he made it through a full season. And that was his second season. So, it's a huge gamble for the Sox. And clearly, I don't think that they want to spend a ton of money anyway. But then Rosenthal's write-up got me thinking, watch Soroka will go to someplace like the Mets and he'll thrive. And it'll be like watching Ronaldo Lopez all over again. Although the only difference is obviously Ronaldo was with the Sox for multiple seasons. And Soroka was already, he was only with the Sox for a season. But that still will be the White Sox luck. Guys go someplace else, fulfill their destiny. Although Soroka already had his career season, obviously in 2019, Lopez was given plenty of runway with the Sox to be a good starter. He just never became one. Plus, Soroka was more effective out of the bullpen, but he was also asked to pitch in a lot of low leverage situations, as I recall. So that's the other thing where I get, hey, the data and analytics and the scouting, but I hope there's some context in that scouting report saying he pitched a lot of low leverage. It wasn't like he was coming out to close games. They were using Justin Anderson a lot for those situations. So I just see teams pursuing a 27-year-old pitcher probably on a cheap deal, hoping something is still there. I don't think it's the way that Rosenthal is writing up where he suddenly is starting to throw his four-seamer more, another Brian Bannister philosophy, and then just suddenly rediscovers his potential. I just think this is a roll of the dice for a team. So if you're thinking, oh man, here's another Ronaldo Lopez situation, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that this is teams like the Mets who have to fill two other potential starting rotation spots. Here's a cheap gamble. And if it doesn't work out, we just move them to the bullpen and it'll help us out there. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor, baseball, and keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. So I'll be back tomorrow. I got a whole bunch of irons in the fire. So I would like to obviously be back tomorrow to discuss what to expect the Sox do at next week's winter meetings. I'm also going to try to get a Sox, what could the Sox get from the Philadelphia Phillies in a trade for Garrett Crochet? Working on potentially doing a crossover with our Lockdown Phillies host. Also tapping into the fan-sided Phillies site. Going to arrange for an interview there. Also, I'm going to have Jakob Meisner of Cubby's Crib on the show at some point to discuss what is realistic for a Sox and Cubs trade involving Crochet. So just going to have a surprise. I got a bunch of irons in the fire for probably Friday and Monday as well. Well, anyways, feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding my fear around the motivation for the Sox trading Luis Robert Jr. and them not really understanding his market, projected starting rotation for 2025, and Michael Soroka actually having a free agent market. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at LockedOnWhiteSox@gmail.com. Have a great day. I will see you tomorrow.